Welcome to the part 2 of the webinar series. At this difficult time with the coronavirus, as I mentioned yesterday, I think it's really critically important to be looking at all of the things that we can do when we're so out of control with the situation to make it a lot easier to cope in our homes with so many in lockdown. That's most of you probably that are listening today. And as I was sharing yesterday, just to do a quick recap, what is going to impact your ability to handle this situation is not only your current life circumstance logically, but also who you are in terms of your spiritual genetics. So I want to just do a quick run through. This will be a review for those of you who were participating yesterday and or who have listened to the recording, but I do have some folks on that were unable to do that, so I just want to give a quick overview. So the first thing is how you process decision making, whether as a soul you have involved in terms of deciding to be a run on the field and play soul, where you are an older soul as terms of lessons learned, younger as far as how many times here physically. A sit in the stands and watch soul, which is where you've been here many times but not actively participating, or a hokey pokey where you're in the middle. The decision making for the run on the field is going to be to jump into things quickly, to be proactive, also to have, and I can say this personally for me, sometimes knee-jerk reactions to information that I get. I'm going to quickly respond, I'm going to quickly react. If I see something on the news that makes me angry about things that aren't being done or people that aren't being helped, I'm going to quickly just like, that kind of a thing. Because yes, I'm Irish and sometimes I can get very passionate about things that I think need to be handled better and quickly, and my first response is going to be a strong one. If you are the same way, then you're run on the field and play. If you're sit in the stands and watch, then you know this is going to be someone who's like, well, let's just see what happens. Okay, don't overreact. Don't be, sometimes people that sit in the stands say, don't be so emotional or don't get so upset about it. And, I will be honest with you, because I have a lot of friends that are that. Not you guys, but a lot of my friends that are not as much this, that when they say that to me, don't get so emotional, I'm like, no, it's not about being emotional. It's about being really passionate and caring deeply. If I care deeply, I'm going to respond strongly. And then I have to remember, that person's to sit in the stands and watch, so their whole MO is to sit back and say, let's get more information, let's see how it goes, let's not get all upset, let's not jump into the understanding of the emotion behind what's going on. If you're a hokey pokey, you're going to go back and forth. Some days you're going to want to jump in, some days you're not going to want to deal with it, back and forth and back and forth. So that's number one. Then we had the 10 lessons. Trust, abandonment, boundaries, loss, and discernment, relationships, balance, growth through adversity and challenge, learning by doing, money and finance, home, family, safety, security, your work and your roles, creativity and communication, completion, and master soul energy. And as we went through those yesterday, I know some of you were self-identifying what lessons were resonating with you. So for those of you that were able to either be live yesterday or to participate by watching the recording last night, if you could, in the chat box, and I know some of you are also having challenges with that, and I've already asked YouTube about that. That's not anything I have control over. It's not a setting. So for those of you that are able to access the chat box and to type something in, if you could just tell me, when you were reflecting last night on this information, as I would imagine that you were, did any of the things kind of click with you in a different way? Did you go, wow, now I understand why I responded this way, or wow, that makes sense to me? Did it make you feel more grounded, perhaps, because you had an explanation for why you are reacting the way that you are to this COVID-19 crisis? Just if you could, a little text. I'm just curious to see the reactions that you guys had upon reflection. And some of you did write me privately, and I appreciate that. Because it really is something that if you are self-aware, you're going to be able to work with it. The next step is, however, how that integrates with people around you. How do you help the people around you cope? And it does require you to, in some ways, assess, I don't mean judge, but assess what those people are. And it's interesting because this isn't just about COVID-19. This isn't just about how you are responding to this crisis. This actually is an exercise in reviewing the way that you interact with the important people in your lives. Family members that either live with you, family members that you're close to, close friends that you have dealing with, family by heart. If you think about it, since everybody has their own unique plan, when you have an understanding of where that person is coming from a spiritual genetic standpoint, you're going to understand them better. All right, so I'm getting some comments. Good. Sounds like it's you're getting some ideas and it's making sense to you. That's good, because this is just a tool. Remember that. This is just a tool. It's kind of a reference guide for you. And the more you delve deeper into self-discovery and self-learning and self-awareness, all of a sudden, to me, it just goes like this. Okay? It all comes together. And instead of things being overwhelming or having no explanation, then you're like, okay, I got this. Because again, I pound this belief. If we understand why something happens, if we understand what's behind it, we can cope. Our brain is set to try and investigate, especially if you have money and finance. It's like, if you have money and finance in your lesson plan, it's like asking a computer to calculate the value of pi. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So, thank you. Glad to see you were able to join us, Sharon. So, if we look at other people in our lives, let's start first, even going back to growing up. Because I want you to think about your nuclear family. We all know, again, that we have DNA that's physical. We choose our families. You might have heard me say that before. You choose your parents. You choose your siblings. Perhaps you choose not to have siblings. And so if we look at that, it kind of takes a lot of angst away from being odd man out in your family. When I discovered that, I'm like, wow, I'm different, and I chose them. Now, I'll be honest with you. I have a wonderful family. I have great parents, a terrific sister. But there were many times growing up, I'm like, really? Like, why am I in this family? Which one doesn't belong? Banana, orange, grapes, boat. I was the boat in my family. Not bad. I was just different. And so when you know that you have chosen a spiritual, genetic, nuclear place to be and to support you as you're still first growing up, you also are going to gain some insight into, again, how you process information and how the people around you do. So I want everybody to take just a moment and think about your folks. Let's start with that. And by parents, it could be by blood, by adoption, by marriage, somebody who took a parenting role. Like, let's say, for example, that your grandmother was a really important person in your life and kind of took on a parenting role. So that's the person I want you to think about. And think about the person that you were closest to. Not to take away from one parent or the other, but a lot of times we feel maybe more connected to one, or one understands us a little bit more. And I want to ask you, when you think about how you process run on the field, sit in the stands, or hokey pokey, how did that primary person process? Were they like you, or did they offset you? Were they like you, or were they different, where maybe they were a balance for you, or maybe it was frustrating for you? So if you would, just take a moment, for those of you that are typing, and just focus on that. Choose one person that you really saw as the closest, I'll put that in quotes, parent or parenting role, and how they process decisions. Did they run on the field, sit in the stands, hokey pokey? And then think about you. Were you the same, or were you different? Okay, so I'm getting different. I'm kind of not surprised at that. All right, how frustrating was that for you? How frustrating was that for you? I know, obviously, I am different in that way with my dad. But my mom, we were more inclined to jump into things a little bit more quickly. As I'm on the extreme end of that spectrum, she certainly wasn't as quick to jump in as I was. But my parents got engaged after the third date, so that was normal to me. Probably why I quickly got married several times. We're gonna not even go there for today. Now, think about the parent that you weren't as close to. All right. think about the one that you weren't as maybe connected to. Did they process the same as you, just in terms of decision making? Quickly, waiting, hokey pokey, because you have to compare it to who you know yourself to be. And ask yourself, were you the same as that person, or were you different than that person? I'm getting a lot of different. So right off the bat, you may be able to start seeing the correlation between how you process and the person that you felt a little bit more comfortable with, all right? And it's not so much, even someone talked about how many hours you spent with somebody. It's not so much that as it is just process. So a lot of times in a family, you may have one that is a little bit closer to you than the others, just in terms of decision making. But if you're different than everybody, and you've always wanted to know why, at least now you have that explanation. So now, as the next part of this exercise, I want you to think if that person, how that person you think would have responded to this crisis. Would they be worrying quickly? Would they be responding quickly? Would they be taking a wait-and-see attitude? And how does that square with how you are? I'm just laughing because everybody is now typing different. Yeah. Well, that's why we're kind of the tribe here, because we're alike here. And it is a different way to see things, different than both. Okay. Now, think about how they would do that. And I know there's a little bit of a delay as I'm talking, so I'm just waiting for you guys to catch up with me in a way to see your responses. So, this is something that now I want you to look at your primary person, or the person that has been a primary partner in your life, whether you're with that person or not with that person now. This person that you've spent most of your life in a partnership with, if there is someone, or the person that was the majority of time. And I would like to know, were they like you, or were they different? And the reason I ask that is, a lot of times we go back to traditional psychology, and psychology says that you choose somebody to be a romantic partner who is similar to one of your parents, and usually it's the opposite sex, all right? You choose a man who's like your dad, you choose a woman who's like your mom, that kind of a thing. Where I come from a spiritual genetic standpoint, is a little bit of different perspective. It's related. But if you think about choosing your family and choosing your parents to accomplish learning a lesson, and within the dynamic of the first 18 years or 22 years or however long until you left home, you didn't accomplish that lesson, you didn't work on or weren't able to usually it's because of the parent, quite frankly, because they're the adult, you weren't able to complete that portion of your plan, you will choose somebody with this spiritual genetic makeup like that one so you can continue to learn a lesson. All right, so we've got more like me. All right. And different. I'm loving all your answers here. Mom would have been the mother hen with her wings gathering all 8 of us. Jackie, that's you. You would gather everybody too. I know you. So again, we have that this sense of feeling, not having had an example perhaps to follow psychologically. Can you see where that could interfere with you working toward being your authentic self, because there's nothing to pattern yourself after, so to speak, spiritually or psychologically? All right? So if we look at that, then what you will find is that internal mechanism starts to really percolate. That's the reason you will have chosen somebody that's very different than you. That's even the reason sometimes that when we're younger and we get married, we choose somebody to finish that aspect of responsiveness and clarity on our own self. And when we learn it, the marriage falls apart. The purpose falls apart. Of course, it could also be if the soul contractors have children come in, soul contract's done. That's another topic. We'll talk about that another time. But isn't it interesting that at the end of the day, the spiritual genetics is so strong and so powerful that it's driving decision making and who you are and how you respond just in terms of normal life, let alone a crisis like this. Okay? Now, I want you to think about your kids if you have them, nieces and nephews if you don't have them, because a lot of times people that don't have their own children take on a parenting role to nieces and nephews, or perhaps a special child in your life. Anybody where you have kind of that parental role in terms of children. And think about how they are responding to the crisis. Do you see yourself in them, or are they doing it differently? Because I'm going to just say anecdotal evidence is that while a lot of times people who are coming in who are spiritually evolving quickly and journeying fast choose circumstances where they are different, they bring in the next generation those who are similar to them. And I just was curious if that's holding true with all of you. Let's see. We're getting a lot of comments. Both were different, but some spiritual, some tried. Husband's completely different response than parents. And it's interesting because if you talk to somebody who is different, they'll say, well, I'm not like that because my parents were. If you talk to somebody who is like their parents, they're like, well, I'm that way because my mother was, or I'm that way because my father was. We always have a logical rationale. It has nothing to do with what's really going on. It comes back to this very real spiritual genetic issue. So back to the children. Are you seeing that they are more like you, or are they different? Now, sometimes this also explains why the connections with our children, or those that we are taking a parenting role to, can be easier with one and more difficult with another. I think there's this great hidden guilt with parents that it's not that they favor one child or the other, it's that they feel more connected or easier able to interact with one child or another. And then it's like, I know I love my children, I know I love them equally. And the children get the sense of, oh, so-and-so's your favorite, I'm not your favorite. Or the one who you relate to later says, well, I'm your favorite. Again, it's just who you are spiritually. And this is operating all the time, let alone during a crisis. But it does then affect the crisis. So I love that you guys are saying your kids are similar. And for the most part, at least one of them. I have one son is similar, the other is different. So that's very interesting. You know, this is something that when you start to look at the world and the dynamics between us, you start seeing that there's a whole lot more going on than we have any idea. And it's not just about psychology. I'm not wrapping psychology. I think it has its place. But I think that the spiritual aspect of it is part of that mind-body-spirit connection. It's part of that intellectual spiritualism, where just because we're talking about spiritual things, we don't engage our brain. There's a logic behind the spiritual genetics. There is design behind spiritual genetics, and it affects everything. It affects everything. It affects where you are in your life and how you respond to any situation, the people you attract in, why you make the decisions you do, why you feel the way you do about certain circumstances, and why you can have different people in the same family that are polar opposite, like my sister and I. We are polar opposite in many ways, not in how we love our families, but in pretty much every other aspect until recently. Interesting. Until recently. My sister has started becoming more open to these kinds of concepts, where before she really wasn't. And it has changed our dynamic because we are closer now, because we have resolved those differences. And I can honestly say that she and I have a very, very close relationship now, whereas before, the approach to understanding life and our place in it was so different. It was hard to connect. And I don't mean that in a bad way. She's a lovely, lovely person. Now, within your dynamic at home right now, I know some of you are living alone and some of you have other people in the household. So for those of you that have someone in your household, how are you responding in terms of the other person that is in lockdown with you? And it might not be a spouse or a partner. I'm in lockdown with one of my best friends right now. So, that's how I would respond in terms of of how she's responding versus I'm responding. I know I mentioned one difference yesterday. So how are you doing and in terms of response there? And is it consistent with how you are responding to most situations generically? Do you see that relation? Is it any surprise that the person would be responding in the way that they are in this circumstance? Because again, it can be a bone of contention sometimes when you're so different. You're like, well, why aren't you, for me, if I were with somebody that was kind of laid back, why aren't you more concerned? Why aren't you responding more? Why aren't you watching more articles? Why aren't you posting things on Facebook? Why aren't you trying to educate people? Why aren't you, doing something? That's me. I have to remember something very important, as I would like to point out to you. If you're here, okay, and the other person is here, run on the field, sit in the stands. The distance between these 2 points is the same. It's absolutely the same. I couldn't be over here. She couldn't be over here. And it's just a perspective that you have to be a little bit more patient and maybe find that middle ground. And this is a source of conflict between people in all kinds of relationships all the time. When you have a crisis situation like COVID-19, it's going to really push those buttons because people are very passionate one way or the other. So I'm getting, oh, I love this. Crystal, team teaching this 6-year-old and trying to give everyone here alone time. I'm sure that's important. And in the house, it absolutely is important to have the alone time to process the changes that we're all feeling. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. It looks like very different responses, very different. Some people, Janice, needing to have boundaries, and that's a good thing. Yes, boundaries are incredibly important with this response right now. So if you can take a few moments after we're done today and just write down the people that you have the most interaction with right now, the people that you're either in lockdown with or the people that you're communicating with the most, and first kind of run through how do they process decisions normally, not under these crisis circumstances. And then go back to the list of 10 lessons and see if you can figure out where they're coming from in terms of their spiritual genetics. That's part 2. Then compare theirs to yours. And what you're going to find is, in your attempt to try and help those that you care about deal with this, because that is the role that we take as parents, as aunts, as friends, you may find that what they need is not what you're providing, because what resonates with you does not resonate with them. And it's really a difficult thing to come to terms with sometimes, because our normal is our normal. It was very normal for me to pick up and move to another country. And I don't see what the big deal is about that. It's just another place. I moved growing up, so it's just a little bit farther away, but people are people. Whereas I look at some of the people in my immediate family that were almost horrified I would make such a decision, couldn't believe I would do it, and it was like this big, major thing. And I had to step back, because at first I'm like, really? Well, what's the big deal? I mean, it's a suitcase, it's a box, it's an airplane ride. I can fly to Europe as easily as I can fly from Vermont to LA, same amount of time actually. So, I just didn't understand it. And then I had to step back and go, okay, I know this person's plan, because of course I've already mapped out everybody around me, because I know this. And I'm like, I have to understand their perspective. It's not about intellect. It's not about even life circumstance. It's about who they are. That has nothing to do with me. And different is okay. So now let's take all of that kind of generically, and I really do think it will be helpful for you just in the relationship dynamics you have with your family to kind of do an assessment. And I don't mean judge. Don't hear that. Don't want you to judge. But just to have a greater understanding and use it as a tool to see them and see the way their life is unfolded, remembering for everyone, you included, that you will attract those people, those circumstances, and those situations into your life to facilitate the learning and growth of the lesson plan you chose for yourself, and that everybody has that same equal responsibility to the evolution of the soul, it can be very helpful to have that self-awareness, and then to also look at them. And I think that it can give you some clues into areas where you could strengthen even the most positive relationship, to have the understanding, to maybe when somebody responds a certain way, to not quote unquote take it personally. And I think I've been in that situation where someone says something and you're like, I'm really surprised that you would say that, because I wouldn't. But that doesn't mean that it's not natural for them to say it. So I think what it does is it gives a lot of insight and ultimately patience in dealing with people. And it's a little bit more intricate than saying, well, everybody's different, we all have to respect what everybody else says or feels. And yes, absolutely, that's the foundation, but it's hard to do sometimes when somebody is so far apart. I don't want to get political in this webinar specifically, but I will just say that, obviously I'm a human being. I have my own strong personal opinions about politics, but I feel more strongly that everybody has a right to their opinion. And so for me, I don't feel like I'm in a position to in any way judge somebody else for feeling differently. I try and understand why people feel differently. Sometimes I don't understand it, but at the end of the day, I'm like, but that's who that person is. That's what the conclusion they've come to after their own inquiry, after their own intellect. That's what resonates truth with them. Who am I to tell somebody else what their truth is? I don't want anybody telling me what mine is. So I think that can be important as well. And it operates all the time. It makes life easier when you can give people a greater latitude for the equal right for them to be able to know that they're coming from a different place. I am being told something spiritually that I want to interject here, and this is interesting because it wasn't something that topically I thought I would go to, but if I'm hearing it, I got to tell it. You know how that is. You may recall that about, it's been 25 years now, I channeled a book called 31 Lessons from John. And the reason it's called 31 Lessons from John is because I wrote the book with my eyes closed, and it was a very profound experience for me. It really is the primer, this book, for all of my intuitive work that came to follow, and the understanding. It was kind of when the floodgates really opened and put form and explanation behind these things that had been happening to me my whole life. And I wrote it with my eyes closed because my hand was used to basically translate the words that I was hearing in my head. And as many of you know, I thought I was going crazy because my hand's winging itself across the page by itself and writing what I'm hearing in my head. And I'm like, I've had one head injury too many. But at the end of the day, I was given a lesson every day for the month of December back in 1997. And after a month of these sessions each night, I had a complete book of about 250 pages, and the total time it took to write the entire book was 18 hours, 15 minutes. I know that because I was told to write the start time and write the stop time. And for me, that experience really changed my life, and while I was in that zone, it seemed like it was 2 or 3 minutes. It was just very fast. And when I was done, I'm looking at it and going, wow, I can barely read my handwriting. If you've ever written with your eyes closed, it was on yellow pad, just changing the page after page. It took longer to type the book than it did to write it. And I go back to 31 Lessons, and the thing that I've been prompted to share with you is this beautiful thought, this beautiful image that John talks about in the beginning of his book. And at the beginning, he talks about what I like to refer to as the spiritual Big Bang Theory. So we know science tells us the Big Bang Theory, that of creation and how it began, not the biblical, but obviously the scientific, and that there is a spiritual Big Bang Theory as well. And of course, it begs the same question: where did the initial light come from? What was there before God? I'm not even going to go into that. That would be an interesting discussion to have, but not in a webinar. But John talks about this light, this tremendous light. And when there was this explosion of the light, right, all these droplets that were spread and flung far and wide, that our souls are actually those droplets. Our souls are those droplets, which means we all came from the same source, and that the evolution of the soul is actually the journey back. Like, oh, the droplets are here. Gotta get the camera here. Go. The soul droplets coming back to make that light whole. That's actually what life is. Well, if we look at it that way, then we are all connected. We are all part of God. We are, or source, or whatever word you like to use. We all share things. We all have to have the common experience to make our way back to be part of this wholeness, this one source. And so it just depends where you are on the journey. And that's your spiritual genetics. I just think that's just the coolest image. And it also explains how people who are so different in such different circumstances, in so many different countries and languages and upbringing and experiences, not harm. Always, I want to reiterate, God will never use harm to teach you, even though you can learn and grow from harm. But at a deep, visceral soul level, we are all from the same source, and we are all returning to the same source. And the individual spiritual genetic is something that we share, because everybody has spiritual genetics, just like everybody is made up of physical DNA or physical bodies, but the DNA is unique. Isn't that cool? So spiritual DNA, the Big Bang Theory, the spiritual Big Bang Theory, it starts to all make so much sense. Now, I want to speak to the people in your home as well as you. So I'd like to see some comments. I already had a couple. Somebody was anticipating what I was saying. Eve says, what I realized with my mom yesterday, that she had a completion point of view, and her daughter, it was the master soul who was crying. Correct. And I think if you can quantify those and in some ways loosely categorize where people are, you can see what and how do I best respond to them. So let's just go through these energies one at a time, the lessons one at a time. You're going to later look and identify the important people that you're supporting through this crisis, in terms of, are they run on the field, sit in the stands, or hokey pokey, number one. Number two, you're going to have identified the top 4 energies that seem to describe them from what you know about that person. Now let's talk about how each of those people, how you can help them in this crisis, because I know that not only are you trying to understand you, but you're trying to know what's best for those around you, and that's important. So I want to try and support you with that. Trust, abandonment, boundaries, loss, and discernment. Trust, abandonment, boundaries, loss, and discernment. If somebody, a loved one in your circle, has this as a big part of their lesson plan, know from the get-go that being reassuring is going to really help. To say, because that person will trust you because you're a primary person in their life, things ultimately are going to be okay. To create boundaries around that person so that they recognize that maybe they're going beyond into extremes and thinking the worst case scenarios. Try and create some boundaries for them so you can say, all right, I understand you're concerned about that, but let's talk about you. Let's keep it very focused on our family, on what we can, on our community. You know, let's not think about the whole world right now, because that's going to be overwhelming. Remember, the trust, abandonment, boundaries, loss, and discernment is a very young energy. And so people that have that, think about a child being in the middle of what used to be a busy Manhattan, and how overwhelming and overstimulating that is. So if you can reduce and create some boundaries around that person, reduce their exposure, try and limit the conversations, get them down to just some very simple basics. Think about the way that when we have children, we answer the questions that they ask, but we don't overload them with information. So your job would be to help that person not be overloaded with information that could then just set off panic. because somebody that doesn't feel they can trust authority, say in the government, and there's a lot of that going on right now, or in leaders, or in the response locally, whether it's the local city councilman, etc., if they feel like they can't trust the media, and everybody, I think, has parts of the media they trust and parts of the media they don't, try and create a boundary around that and get it down to something that feels manageable, and help them understand that it's okay to not engage all the time in this pursuit, to not wallow in the difficult information, because that will just absolutely short circuit them. And that it's okay to try and use a little discernment in teaching them to trust, does this make sense to you? What you're being told that's upsetting you? Does that ring true to you? Because if it rings true to you, that's one thing, but if it doesn't, say no, discard it. You don't have to embrace everything. Not everybody's going to be right. Not everybody is going to say things, or reports you're going to read are going to be accurate. At the end of the day, you can only go with what resonates with you. So I'm going to ask, of those of you that have somebody that you can just kind of think off the top of your head, this issue, or even yourself, does that make sense that would be an effective tool to help someone? Just send me a note in the chat box so I can see you. I'd like to hear if that's resonating, or if you have any questions about that. Again, remember, trust is something that is about that person trusting self, so you want to foster that by giving them the opportunity to create boundaries, giving them permission to create the boundaries, to be discerning, not to feel like they're judging when they're discerning. There's a difference. And also for that person trusting you and what you say. Okay? All right, looks like it's starting to resonate with some folks. Great. So that's the biggest issue with trust, abandonment, boundaries, loss, and discernment. Just see people in terms of thinking how you would talk to a younger child, and I don't mean that patronizingly to the person, but it is a young energy, all right? What you would say and how you would act, and how you can, growth-wise from this, promote that person trusting self. Because at the end of the day, this lesson is about not only learning boundaries, learning how to say no, being discerning, coping with what appears to be lost but really isn't, it's just being protected. But at the end of the day, the biggest component of trust, abandonment, boundaries, loss, and discernment, I should just say trust, etc., is helping that person trust the inner voice more than the outer voices. Let me say that again. Helping that person learn to trust the inner voice more than the outer voices. All right, does that make sense? Okay, good. Now, relationships. That's the next on the plan. Relationships are going to always be triggered by this kind of a situation because of the fear something's going to happen to you, or something's going to happen to them. If you have a child who is always worried about you, that person probably has relationships in his or her energy. If they're always thinking something's going to happen, you're going to die young, what am I going to do without you, I can't do without you, well, physical death is inevitable. And if you have a child that you're like, I just don't know how that child is going to cope with me when the day comes when it's my time, because they really seriously are going to be so traumatized. I just am worried about that. One of my children is that way, and all of them check in on me, all of them are worried about me, but one of my children in particular is almost panic-stricken that something uncontrollable is going to happen and I'm not going to be here. It doesn't help that she also has completion in her plan, because that's about control. So those two together, talk about panic, bless her heart. If you have somebody that is all about relationships, the thing that we want to promote is the relationship with self, and it kind of goes hand in hand with that trust, abandonment, boundaries, loss, and discernment, because you really are working towards supporting that person having the relationship with self that's strong enough to take a position and feel comfortable with it, to be complete and whole unto self, to not need the affirmations and the confirmation from those around them, but to look to self for some of the answers. And then, of course, using the first lesson that they will have already learned, to trust it. Because remember, these lessons build on one another, all right? There's a pattern to how they build on one another. It is promoting the understanding that when you have a relationship with self, you are able to be more comfortable in taking a position with other people because you're more confident. And this is an energy that is also about breeding confidence in the person, knowing who you are, exploring who you are, valuing who others are, but not valuing to the point that you would let that person's opinion supersede your own. Let me say that again. Valuing other people's opinions and respecting their opinions, but not having their opinions supersede your own. Because that's something that is also very common. If you know somebody who is always worried about what everybody else thinks, they're thinking externally, they're thinking outwardly, what is my relationship, but from the perspective of somebody looking at me, not me looking at them. So does that make sense, that if you know somebody that has this energy, that to work towards saying, you are intelligent, articulate, capable, and go ahead and really think about and filter what you're hearing through, does this make sense to me versus what I'm being told from other people? There's the trust, all right? And also about how you know your own personal, and claiming your own personal response and being comfortable with it. If you're really upset about this, own it. Own it. If you feel that other people are not taking it seriously, acknowledge it, but don't own it. You can't own somebody else's stuff. You can't take ownership and responsibility for somebody else's life lessons or choices, only your own. So that's where that comes in. If you have a child or a loved one who is worried that you're going to get sick from this, overly so, okay, then there needs to be a discussion about reality being faced, that physical death is a part of life, but physical death doesn't mean death of the life. Let me say that again. Physical death we all experience in physical life, but physical death doesn't mean the end of life. Life is our entire living existence, of which birth to death is but a small part. And someone said it's hard not to take on other people's beliefs, right? To be so strong in your own dynamics, your own relationship with you, that it's not a defensive posture. I still think you need to be respectful for others, but you don't need to subjugate your opinions based on what other people think. You are entitled to your opinions, and you are a unique person, and your opinions are going to be your own. I think this is very similar to how I feel about defending people's rights to their faith beliefs. I've always said that next to that great big library in the sky, because I believe there's a big library, kind of like the one I've got behind me here, where we all have a volume on the shelf, and we all have something that makes us unique. I think there's a wall of faith next door to that library. And in my mind, for some reason, I always see something that's a little bit physically like the Vietnam Memorial Wall in D.C. I don't know why that is, but in my mind, that's kind of what the design looks like. And we all have a brick in that wall. We all have a brick in that wall. And the brick is unique. That brick is made up of all of our experiences on this whole ribbon of life, okay, our entire living existence to this point. It's this time around our own inquiry, it's the people around us, it's the experiences that we've had. Every brick is different. But bricks don't make a wall. You can't just have a bunch of bricks up and have it be a wall. What makes a wall is the mortar that connects them. Okay? You see where I'm going with this? So we are all connected and different. And when it comes to having a discussion about the coronavirus and handling it and how you process information about it, yes, you are going to come from a sense of the brick, but the commonality is we're all entitled to have our own brick. So if you can tolerate the commonality while you still stand strong in the brick, that's where you want to be. That, you focus on the mortar that binds you, because that's the respect for somebody else to have their own dynamic. But that doesn't mean that you change your brick to be like somebody else's. So that's relationships. How many of you that have somebody, or even you yourself have relationships, how many of you does that resonate with? Does that make sense to you, or do you have any questions about that? I want to give you a quick opportunity to ask about that before I move on to balance, which is next. And again, if you have somebody that has relationships and they are really almost panic-stricken about, are you okay? Just assuring them that you are doing everything possible, that you want them to focus on self, that if they will take care of themselves and you take care of yourself, then everybody's good. But if they're busy worrying about you, they're not going to be taking care of themselves. And the way that they can help you be healthiest is if you know that they're taking care of themselves, that it's not their job to take care of you. It's your job to take care of you. And that's really an important point. All right. So let's talk about balance. I see a couple people saying, yes, it makes sense. Good. No questions that I can see. Balance always has to connect to how our physical bodies work, because it is about the mind, body, spirit balance, and body obviously is a part of the three. All right. Also because the universe, with people with balance, will use the body to get your attention, to pay attention to you. We know that the universe knows you pay more attention to a broken arm and a broken energy. If you have pain, if you're ill, you make yourself a priority. If any of you have ever had cancer that have balance in your plan, as soon as somebody says, hey, you've got cancer, guess what? The world stops. And all of a sudden, you're not caring about everybody else. You're caring about you, and you should be. You know, if you have a family member or friend that's going through it, anytime I hear of anybody that's gotten a diagnosis, and it usually breaks my heart because I know what journey they have ahead of them, but the first thing I say is, go get your tiara. Go get your tiara. I have actually bought tiaras and given them to people that do not understand that when you are sick, not only are you dealing with the physical aspect, but you're also dealing very strongly with the spiritual aspect, which is the universe getting your attention, that you've got to take care of you and pay attention to you and spend money on you and time on you and be a priority. You know, because I've shared with you that I have this, so I get pretty wound up about this. And even though I know it, you may recall, broke this wrist now 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. It got my attention, and it changed my life in a good way, because anytime I start forgetting I've got to take care of me too, and that I have that responsibility, the responsibility to self to do that, to have self-care, I just remember how much that broken wrist hurt. I'm like, nope, don't want that reminder, don't need that reminder, I'm good. I've got it. It's okay for me. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. So if you have balance in your plan, if you're inclined to always think about others, always give to others, if you, for example, never let anybody pick up a check when you go to lunch, if you go with a friend and they always pick up the check, or go get the check, and you're like, no, I got it. I got it this time, you get it next time. Or if someone picks you up at the airport and the parking is $2 and you're freaking out because they won't let you give them $2, etc., etc. Even a compliment. Somebody gives you a compliment and you immediately want to give a compliment back to somebody. All little kind of indicators you have balance. The resistance to self-care, the guilt when you do have self-care. Just be aware you are going to be more vulnerable energetically to coronavirus. Sorry, not trying to scare you here, but maybe a little. Because when you have a virus that is so strong and so easily transmitted, and you combine that with an energetic weakness where you're not paying attention to you, you're not meeting your own needs, you're not self-nurturing, yeah, it could very well be used as a tool to get your attention. And if you're afraid of COVID-19, here's the thing, you should be. Remember, we talked about the role of fear yesterday. We should all be afraid of this thing, because even though most people recover, a lot of people don't. Do you want to roll those dice? I don't, and I don't want you to either. So the thing that you can do from a preventive aspect is not only to wear the mask and wear the gloves. That was glass and mugs. We got glass. Wear the mask and wear the gloves. Something else is critically important, especially for people with balance, is to find ways right now during this crisis to self-nurture. self-nurture, or the I guess the buzzword now is self-care. I've been saying self-nurture for 20 years. I guess self-care is more catchy. I should have come up with self-care instead of self-nurture, but it's the same thing, folks. Now, obviously, you can't go out and do a lot of the quote-unquote self-care things or self-nurturing things I usually recommend, which is to get a massage or get your nails done or walk the mall or etc., because we're on lockdown. So you have less options on how to make yourself a priority. But here's some things you can do, absolutely. Number one, read. Read. Read up on something that you've always been interested in, that you've never done before. Actually, I'm going to recommend that people go on the internet, but not to look at COVID-19 stuff. Maybe there's something that you have always wanted to do, something from when, say, you were a child, or something that you enjoyed as a child. Maybe when you were a teenager in high school, you did art or music, or you always wanted to learn how to do an interest, something, or dance. Yes, somebody just said dance. You can find and learn anything on the internet. And this is actually the good use to me of this connectivity that we have that we now can't even imagine living without. It's really amazing. There is an academy called, I believe it's Udemy, Udemy. There's also several free online schools where you can learn just for the sake of learning. And learning is a wonderful way to nurture the mind. If you have balance, we're talking about the mind-body-spirit connection. So it doesn't have to be a spiritual awakening or a spiritual inquiry, although that's a good thing to do too, because this is certainly a spiritual journey we're all on universally. But there absolutely, there's things that you can learn that just are of interest to you. Another language. I found a website, and I am absolutely looking forward to working on this, although I'm also working on a couple other things right now that I want to do more. Not that they have a higher priority, but things I want to do, because I'm trying to set aside time, and I'm going to ask those of you that have balance to set aside time to do things you want to do, not just what you need to do. And actually, that would be a good exercise too. If you think you have balance and you're making notes today, as many of you are, jot down some things that you want to do, whether now or after we finish this webinar. Things you've always wanted to do, that you can learn about now, and then actually, if you have to go outside the home to do them when this is all over, hey, you've got a to-do list already, things to jump in with, okay? I think that it can be really important to, like, say, learn a language. I started to say that's something I want to do. I found this website, and it was really fascinating. I don't learn language from being around people. I never have done the immersion technique. It doesn't work for me as a writer. I see structure, I see grammar, I see vocabulary. That's how I learn language. And this website was talking about patterns in words. Every time you see T-I-O-N in an English word, for example, it's C-I-O-N in Spanish. And then it listed like 100 words. And it said, now you know all these 100 words because you know that little key, that pattern to changing the T-I-O-N to C-I-O-N. And that made sense to me. I'm like, wow, I want to do this. I'm living in Spain. I intend to continue living in Spain. Although I also thought I was going to live on the island the rest of my life. And before that, I thought I was going to live in Paris the rest of my life. So as my son Anthony said, Mom, just accept the fact that wherever you are, that's where home is, and you may or may not end up there. And he was right. But in the meantime, I am in Spain, and going on 6 years, and I want to be better at it out of respect for the country in which I'm living. And so this is something that I haven't made the time to do. And guess what? I'm going to make time to do it now. All right? I'll have to look up. I'll post on to you. I'll make a note to myself, and if I forget, please someone remind me. Christiane, remind me. I'll let you know what that website is, because it really is a really wonderful way to me to approach it, and because it builds your vocabulary so quickly. Yeah, plan more travel. Yeah, right there with you, hon. Right there with you, Jackie. But to take the time to think about that, to dream. If you have wanted to draw, you're not sure you have talent, but you thought you might like to, or maybe you sketched in school, you can order things online. You can get supplies, simple supplies. So just think about things that you enjoy doing. Someone said technologies, right? Maybe there are programs that have eluded you. I've certainly been on a learning curve, and you guys right along with me for the programs I've had to learn to do this. And I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress, and I thank you for that. But it's exercising the mind. So mind, body, spirit. So yeah, we've got the spiritual aspect. I'm trying to tell you from the spiritual side. I'm talking about spiritual journeying. But don't forget the mind piece, especially if you have balance in your plan. And if you will do that, if you will strengthen the mind, you will strengthen the spirit, guess what? The body's going to be stronger. You will not need to draw in energetically an illness to get your attention, to pay attention to you, because you're already doing it. So there is a connection to that. The fourth and the fifth seminar of the seminars of the series, we're going to be talking about what the different body parts mean and what they tell you. And I can tell you right now, people that have balance are going to be really more susceptible to those lessons than anybody else. So remember, balance equals body in very many ways into the physical world and how we approach our interactivity with the physical world. Okay? Growth through adversity and challenge. Always take a deep breath on that one because, as I've shared with you, it is the most challenging, literally and figuratively, of the lessons that we can learn. And in this crisis, it's either going to really help you because it is a challenge and you're up for challenges and you're good with challenges, all right? Or it's going to make you feel like, here we go again. And it's going to feed the negativity. And you have to kind of resist that. If your life has always been more difficult than others, if you always need challenge to be excited, if something comes too easily and you don't say thank you God, you say what's the catch, you might remember that this is an indicator. These are all indicators of growth through adversity and challenge. This challenge does not have to be connected to any other challenges you've ever had in your life. Please hear that. There is not some kind of bullseye on your backside if you have this energy where, well, here we go, one more thing, and wouldn't you know it, I'm the one that got coronavirus. Those are the kinds of things that somebody with growth through adversity and challenge would say. So in the way to defeat that, the way to work with that, the way to help somebody in your home or in your immediate surroundings that you're supporting emotionally through this crisis, how to help that person, is to point out and recognize that this is unique. This is unique. And this virus is not discriminating in any way, shape, or form to gender, age, demographic, language, education, finances, any of that. Although it does seem to be disproportionately attacking people of color, and we've learned that too, especially the African American community. They're seeing higher mortality rates, although I think my sense of that, my suspicion of that energetically is that it's because they're in circumstances that lend itself to the transmission a little bit easier because there's a disproportionate number of African Americans in our country who are dealing with poverty areas. Could be. We'll see. Why not so dissimilar than Italy, where they live on top of one another and there's a lot of close interactivity, and we saw that tremendous transmission. I digress. But the person that has this, you have to make sure that you do not allow that person, or you speak from a logical place against the emotional response and the emotional reaction of course I would be the one to get it. This kind of crap happens to me all the time. So the argument that it happens, and it's happening to everyone, that this is random to some extent, that it's sometimes, things just don't break your way. But there are a lot of people that have had wonderful lives, easy lives, great lives, that are also having this impact them. So it's not like they're being singled out. Maybe that's the best way I want to put it. Remind those people they are not being singled out for this particular circumstance. They are one among millions, and those numbers, man, if you were a betting person, it wouldn't be a stretch to think that somebody that would be exposed to it or would be able to have gotten it. So that thinking can sometimes lead toward almost a self-pitying role, and you have to also be aware of that. But it can be kind of understandable if somebody has always had a hard life and they get the affirmation that life is hard all the time. They don't understand what they've got in their lesson plan. All they know is they look at somebody else and somebody else's life is easy and their life is hard, and you're like, what's up with that? This can be seemingly one more reason to prove that, this is what my life is. My life is hard. Don't let the person go there, because that really feeds the negativity. When you feed the negativity grows. You do not want that person to feed the beast. And what I mean by that generically, it's a phrase I use often. If we think about back to the Native American saying, and I know several different tribes claim it, I know several different people claim to be the source of it. I live in Oklahoma. I have friends who are Cherokee. They swear to me, all my Cherokee friends, this is a Cherokee saying, so we'll see, that there was the old wise man, and he was talking to his grandson. He was the medicine man, and he was explaining to this young boy that the process of life is that we all have two wolves inside of us. One is good and one is evil, or one is light and one is dark, would be my preference of vernacular. And that life is the fight between the two inside each of us. And the little boy with rapt attention said, yes, but grandfather, which one wins? And the wise man says, the one you feed. I think that was one of the most profound sayings I ever heard. And there are times in my life when even I had something come into my life and my first reaction was anger, fear, hurt, all negatives. I fed the beast and I made it worse instead of looking for the understanding behind it. Yes, you're human. Yes, you're going to have emotions. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, because if you stuff it inside and stuff it inside and stuff it inside, you kind of spiritually constipate yourself, and pretty soon you're full of crap. That doesn't work either, okay? But what I am saying is that people that have growth through adversity and challenge, because circumstances and situations up to this point have appeared to support the premise that their life is harder than everyone else's, you cannot allow that person to think that this is just one more nail in that proverbial coffin that they are building for themselves. And I don't mean a literal coffin, I just mean in terms of their identity and tying themselves down. Does this make sense to you? Because I think in many ways people that have growth through adversity and challenge are having a more difficult time with handling what's going on in some ways than others, perhaps others than those that have completion. Does this make sense to you? Just give me a little quick message in the comments bar. So I think, the other thing that you can do is you can really invoke that idea of overcoming this challenge and helping others overcome the challenge, because people that have growth through adversity and challenge are ideas persons because they've had to learn how to cope. They've had to learn how to kind of have broken plays in their life. If you think about it in terms of football, they are the ultimate broken play people. Okay, so, and I don't mean broken like hurt. I mean like if the quarterback throws the ball and it gets fumbled, it's a broken play. Or if they don't have a receiver open, I don't know why I'm getting football analogies, but I love football. They've got to scramble and make another decision. So people with growth through adversity and challenge do have to scramble a lot of times to try and make it down the field. So I'm getting whooshed on this big time. Maybe there's somebody in spirit that plays football. I don't know if you can see this on the camera. Can you see? I've got the hairs like literally standing up on my arms. If you can encourage them to scramble and come up with some solutions to help self, help neighbors, help community, and to really challenge them to rise to the occasion and to turn what would seemingly be a negative into the positive. This is another way that you can support and help that person cope and give them something to do. Because people with growth, adversity, and challenge, the more they can quantify things and be more hands-on about it, the more they're able to work with the energy, the more it doesn't settle in their mind. Because people that have this energy a lot of times are inclined also toward depression. And why? There seems to be a correlation to me informally that I've noticed over the years. Because why wouldn't they be? Like seriously, if life was always hard for you, wouldn't you be kind of depressed about that? But if everybody knows, everybody has to learn this lesson. Everybody has to, at some point, have growth through adversity and challenge in this God school analogy I've been talking about. To know that it's not just you being picked on, can be very helpful. To know, B, there's something you can do about it. And the way to work with this energy is always to focus on the growth and the growth that came from the challenge and not the actual event. Does this make sense to you? Or do you have any questions about this? I'm going to just give you a minute because this is a biggie. This is a biggie, and I understand that. Excuse me, I'll take a little water. All right. I'm getting people saying yes, that makes sense. Okay, now, the next one of the lessons that we talked about yesterday was learning by doing. Learning by doing. You might recall this is where people compartmentalize their life, where they're hands-on about things. And boy, if ever there were a time, there's an element of creativity to it too. Also, this energy is kind of a cousin energy, which I think I neglected to mention yesterday. It's a cousin energy to creativity and communication. All right, they're related. So people that have this energy are also normally very good communicators, or at the other end of the spectrum, need to learn how to communicate. Okay, it's one or the other. Remember, you have an energy and there's a spectrum, and it's either a strength or a challenge. It's either something you do well or something you came to learn to do better. I did have some questions about that last night. What does it mean with a lesson? There's always going to be several aspects of it, and it can change over time. Whereas, we'll go back to this communication issue, maybe you were here where you needed to learn how to communicate, and the growth in the lesson was here, and this is where you ended up, and that's where you were supposed to be. Hey, good news, you learned the lesson. Once you learn the lesson, it's yours. You don't have to go through that stuff anymore, okay? So, if we look at how you can best help somebody who has this energy, the biggest challenge is they are physically restless. Or if you have it, you are physically restless. Of those of you that self-identified as having some of this in your lesson plan, I'm just going to ask for a quick show of hands, more or less on chat. How many of you, when you sit, do you do this with your leg? Or do you have to always tap? Or you, on the table, or you're tapping your foot? That you literally can't sit still. Does that identify you? Or someone you know that you believe has this energy? Just give me a yes or a no. Yeah. If I see somebody that's sitting there and they're like, their leg, I can't show you my legs here, but they cross their legs, and I do see this actually more often in men than I do women, this energy, just like I see balance more often in women than men. Again, don't know why that is. It just seems to be a pattern anecdotally that I've noticed over the last 20 years. But if you notice that they're constantly going, or ADHD, people that have ADHD, attention hyperactivity disorder, where even their train of thought jumps from here to here to here to here to here to here. Do you ever notice that they're moving? There's a good chance that they have this energy in their plan. So if you are housebound, if you are locked down, oh my God, this is like the ultimate challenge. It's like seeing a caged animal in a zoo pacing inside the cell, because that sense of being constricted and not being able to be free, not being able to move, not being able to, say, travel, is going to be very, very hard unless that person has some other energies that kind of soften it. But if this is the main energy, you're going to have to distract. Even if it's somebody like your husband. Some people are saying that. If you are in constant motion, you have to translate the motion from physical motion into psychological motion or mind motion, discussions, being hands-on with things like crossword puzzles, or not crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, because you're picking something up, it's tactile, and you're creating it, you're doing something where you're hands-on. The computer, people are usually pretty good with computers if they have this, because they're tactile in the way they approach things, but that's not going to address the need to physically engage in the surroundings. This might be a good time to say, hey honey, why don't you clean out the attic? Because the weather's getting nicer, it's a little bit warmer. It's not in the middle of winter for those of you that are in colder states, although I did hear Vermont was getting some snow possibly this week, which I know sometimes that happens, but maybe this is a time to redecorate, to move the furniture around just to see what it looks like. Maybe you've always had the sofa on one wall and you decide, let's see what it looks like and let's change things up a little bit and move things around. Move paintings off the wall, switch them around. Anything you can do that is going to provide a panacea to the need to have movement in your physical body or in your surroundings or in your space, and to be hands-on in what you're doing, that's going to help somebody that has this energy. We all can think about things like, cleaning out the attic. Yeah, I'll get to it one day. Or the garage. Especially men, boy, why don't you organize your tools? That could be something you could do. You'd never have time to do that. Now you've got the time, so that could be something you could do. Or putting something together. A lot of times people that have learning by doing are very project driven and like to be hands-on and not read the directions. Sorry guys. So the ones that you do the bicycle for Christmas and you have 3 screws stuff over and you're like, couldn't have been that important, right? Okay, so maybe it's putting something together, maybe creating something, bookshelves, something like that. So it can be anything that you can physically engage, where somebody can do. Painting is an activity that's also good, even if you never really knew how to paint. There again, go to the internet, do some sketches. Hands-on, hands-on, hands-on. You want to do that. Also, you may find the person that has this energy can appear to be, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, okay, a little bit moody. Don't try and talk the person out of the mood. That really is only going to make them pull farther away. That's going to make them feel less likely to be engaged, and you want to keep this person engaged. Just remember that people that have learning by doing have a house with many rooms, all right? And when they're in one particular room, they're really vested in that room. And sometimes they need to go into another room. It doesn't mean they don't like the room that they've been in. It doesn't mean they don't like the people that are in that room. But they may need to go into a room just by themselves for a while, literally and spiritually and psychologically. They need to shut down. They need to be introspective. They need to be left alone. That doesn't mean something is wrong. That means that is their way of dealing with things, to be able to shut away the overload that's coming from the media maelstrom that's upon us in terms of the COVID-19, and to be able to just go in a room that's quiet to breathe. And that's okay. So the natural tendency, I think, is to say, are you okay? What's wrong? Do you want to talk? We could do this. We could do that. The best thing to say to somebody that has this energy and to help them cope is to say, hey, if you want to, take some downtime, I totally get it. Just let me know when you're ready to talk. Or if you want to, have dinner in your room, if it's a child, that's okay. People that have this energy know how to settle. Sometimes it's listening to music. Sometimes for younger people it's video games, which is not a bad thing. Video games keep a very active part of your brain very active, that actually helps offset of dementia and Alzheimer's. So that doesn't mean it's a bad thing as long as it's in some kind of a balance. But to give them the opportunity to not feel they have to be engaged and be in the room you want them to be in, and I'm not being literal here, I'm being spiritual, when where they really need to be is in the room by themselves. Okay? Don't think that there isn't a lot going on with that person just because they're not talking about it. And this is where the communication piece of it comes in, right? Sometimes people need to have that internal dialogue first. They need to watch other people, and then what you may find is 3 days later, here comes this exposition on the topic, any topic, or the coronavirus in particular, that you never would have expected, because they had time to kind of, go into this room and get this information, and go in this room and get this information, and then think about it, and then it's like, and here it is. So they may supersede or exceed, rather, your expectations of them, and that's how they're going to like it. So if you have this energy, if you've got that restless spirit in you, and you have also somebody in your life that you're trying to help through it that has this energy, send me a note and let me see if this is helpful for you, or if you have any questions about how to accomplish that. One other thing I will mention, people that have this energy normally will gravitate toward being near water. And this is always a good thing, because water obviously has movement. And so when they can see movement, when they feel like movement is around them, when they're not restricted, when they're not confined, even if they have to stay in, if they can see water, that's going to be a natural way. And so even having screensavers that have running water on them, believe it or not, would be something that could be helpful. Or if you have it on TV, where it's on standby, you can project music, you can project scenes, like screensaver scenes, having running water, having water running. If you have one of those little small, large running water things you can plug in, or order one for their room if it's a young person and they're really struggling with not being able to move around. Hearing the water and the constant sound of water is going to be helpful. You can order them on Amazon. Usually you can get them like Bed Bath & Beyond, and where it's just like the little portable waterfall. You know what I'm talking about? Like they have the bowl, and then it's got kind of the little fountain. Plus, they can put it together, and that'll make them happy too. So that can help. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, people are saying it resonates with water. So that's always a good thing. Because obviously, if you don't live near water, you're not going to be traveling to go see water right now. So anything you can do to bring that movement into that person's environment is going to be helpful. Right, yes, Jackie, absolutely. Living on a lake and taking cruises. And now you know the energetic reason why that appeals to you, all right? And that's also free spirit energy, and we're going to talk more about those kinds of differences tomorrow, which is kind of an extension. It's not part 3 of today, but it's about the fixed energies and the patterns of energies, and where that can come into play as well. The next is money and finance. Money and finance. Anybody that has money and finance, if you have it in your plan, or somebody you know and are supporting through this has it, remember the way to approach them is always going to be facts, figures, and logic. That's real simple. Facts, figures, and logic. If the stress level of that person is here, and you can present evidence that's here, you're going to reduce this tremendously. Now, the problem a little bit is, right now the facts and figures and statistics are scary. So people that have this, as I mentioned yesterday, are having a bigger fear response than some people that this doesn't matter. But still, there's a lot of statistics out there. There's a lot of information to ingest, and just the process of looking for it and feeling like you can quantify this thing will actually lessen the stress connected to it. Even if the numbers are not the numbers that we like, they will be. Hopefully we'll see flattening of the curve. We're starting to see that in some areas potentially. But the way to approach this person is not through so much how they feel about things as it is the logic. The logic that this is a virus and viruses die. That it has a life, that the virus is not eternal. If a virus were eternal, that would mean that there was eternal physical life somewhere, and I guarantee you somebody already would have been cloning that virus to see if we could make it ourselves happen, So, but think about, being able to say, look, this is why the quarantine time, this is why the isolation time, this is why you separate, this is why it has to come in contact with you. All the logical things you can do to prevent this vulnerability to the coronavirus is going to be the way to approach somebody or to support somebody through this. The more information you can provide about the optimism, about any place where they're starting to see the deaths come down, where you can see cycles, because the idea of cycles is going to, cycles, not psychos, cycles is going to appeal to people that have money and finance, okay? Because they need to have the facts. Where you're also going to see some anxiety is if seemingly the facts are contradictory. And let's face it, there's a lot of contradictory information out there right now about the causes, about who started it, about where it started, whether it's real, whether it's man-made, whether it's nature-made, whether it's a bioweapon, all of these things, 5G, towers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of information out there, and not all of it good, and not all of it documented. And there still is that sense of, well, if I saw it on the news, or this person says they know better, then it's truth. So another thing that's really going to help is to encourage somebody to think about what's going on in terms of how they can quantify the virus. Now, someone said, what if somebody's lost his or her job? Yes, we had spoken yesterday about the impact of the fear and the worry on somebody that has money and finance, and it's going to be through the roof because that's where a lot of things are related, and it absolutely is related. Yes, that was a question that someone just posed. Because the fear of having a job, having money, being able to pay bills. Again, you want to approach this argument logically. First of all, you want to be able to say, if it's you or someone else, of course that this is going to affect you, okay? Of course it's going to resonate with you. Of course it's going to be a bell and whistle for you. So do be aware of that. But this is the reason why. And remember, money and finance is the why person, the why person. So if you can find answers, that can quell that. I think I'm looking money and finance for my plan. I look at the data, even though it's not so good. Exactly, you're already looking at the calculations of where you live and staying home, and that's causing you to be safe. And so just got a whoosh on that, Crystal. So that is one way to approach somebody that has money and finance. Also, is to be able to say, see, here's a reason for you to feel good about where you are, feel good about what's happening. Statistically, to see that you are not in a high vulnerability area, but that doesn't mean you don't still hedge your bets as much as you can by being proactive with masks and washing hands and wearing gloves when you go outside and social distancing, etc. Jackie, wonderful that you're helping your grandchildren cope, and I'm sure that everybody's worried about their jobs right now if they've lost them. Money is a concern for everyone. How could it not if you're affected financially by this? But people that have money and finance, it will push them to almost panic. It will be one of their big red flags, big bells and whistles. So the way to combat that is always to be able to come back and talk to people in terms of what are the chances that. That was a good point, Crystal. To be realistic and to gain perspective and to be finite about the information as it relates to you or to that person. So that's going to be a very strong way and an approach to use versus somebody, say, that's more emotional. They're going to want, like Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Okay, that's where you need to come for that. Home, family, safety, security, your work and your roles. Kind of related to money to the degree that if your role as your worker is at risk, the money's going to be an issue, but it's really going to be about your responsibility. And if you feel that you can't meet your responsibilities financially, you also are going to have your bells and whistles like just blown away. If you define yourself by the role in terms of your work, this is who I am, is really the same thing as this is what I do. Somebody that works in a company they've always belonged to or worked for, a teacher, a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer. When you meet somebody and you say, well, tell me about yourself. If it's you or somebody and the first thing they say is, well, I'm an engineer, or I'm an accountant, or I'm a marketing rep, or I'm a salesperson. If that's the first thing that they tell you about themselves, chances are that this is in their energy, or maybe it's in yours. It's how you see yourself. It's your identifier. All right. So the good news is, as we talked yesterday, part of this process is to kind of support that growth that's required of this energy to translate from human doing to human being. But if you have lost your job through this process, it's really a loss of identity. It's a loss of identity. So how you help somebody that has this as a dominant energy, or if it's yours, is to really try and step back and think about who are you absent your roles. So I always recommend an exercise where you make a list of 20 words, and people that have this energy are list people anyway, so that's going to appeal to you. And so it's a good tool, it's a good mechanism to use. And I want you to write down 20 words that describe you, all good ones, positive ones, 20 words that cannot contain roles. I'm talking about adjectives like kind, gentle, smart, loyal, patient, caring, giving, loving, etc. That's already going to be hard for you. I'm going to tell you that right now. You know why? Because another part of this energy is you can't stand arrogance. You can't stand conceit. And it's going to feel like, oh my gosh, I can't say these things about me. I can't say all these nice things about me. Well, that's part of the exercise. That's part of why it's important. And here's a way I want to give you a way to give yourself permission to make this list of 20. Not 10, not 15, not 17, 20. 20. All right. So how you do it, and some of you have heard me describe this before, but I'm just going to go over it here now for those of you that are unaware of this. Write 1 through 20 and leave like 3 spaces in between. That's going to be your list, 1 through 20. Then, kind of like when you were in school, if you ever got in trouble and had to write the same sentence over and over again, I will not, throw spitballs at the teacher 100 times or whatever. 20 times I want you to write, God gave me the gift of. God gave me the gift of. 20 times. 1 through 20. God gave me the gift of. Now, I want you to go back and I want you to think about who you are, the beingness of you, and not the doingness of you. And I want you to put your 20 words at the end of that sentence 20 times. God gave me the gift of patience. God gave me the gift of kindness. God gave me the gift of loyalty. God gave me the gift of compassion. God gave me the gift of intellect. God gave me the gift of inner beauty. God gave me the gift of outer beauty. Because you want to remember the saying, and it's not mine. I believe it was Stan Caulfield that wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul. I should probably check on that. I want to properly give credit to the person that said it because it was brilliant. What talents and abilities you have is God's gift to you. What you do with them is your gift to God. So if you don't even acknowledge these wonderful gifts that you've been given, which are the wonderful attributes of who you are, it's kind of like saying, hey, God, you know all those things you gave me? You don't want to do that? Trust me, you don't want to do that. If you've been given a gift, you have the responsibility to embrace it first, to claim it. Because if you don't do that, you can't be in gratitude for it. That makes sense. So it's a way to give you, from a point of ethic and integrity, a way to accept who you are and the beingness of you versus the doingness of you. Because people have no problem at all saying, I'm an engineer. But that feels very different than saying, I have the intellect to be an engineer. The fact that you're an engineer tells people, well, you probably got some smarts because it's not easy to be an engineer. But then you don't have to, kind of say that you're that. All right? But there's nothing wrong with claiming intellect if that's one of your gifts. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong if that's not one of your gifts, but if it is one of your gifts, why would you hide that? You don't have to go around telling everybody, oh, I'm smart. Yep, so everybody knows I'm smart. You don't have to do that. But you yourself need to know and be able to identify and be comfortable with identifying who you are, absent your roles, because your roles are a result of what you have accomplished or what you do. We all have roles. We start out as children. That's our first role. Then perhaps siblings or friend or parent, mom, dad, uncle, aunt, whatever it may be. So if you need to know, excuse me, who you are without those roles, then the loss of that role is not going to be as big a threat to you as it would if your identity is so tied up with that role. Does that make sense? Also, this energy carries with it a sense of integrity and truth. If you feel there's not integrity or truth around a topic, whatever it may be, it is also going to set off all your bells and whistles. It might even anger you, and the frustration of not being able to have a voice, not being able to speak up, not being able to let people know. Like whistleblowers, believe it or not, oftentimes have this energy in them because from an integrity standpoint, they just can't stand the thought that somebody doesn't know something is wrong. So there's a sense of justice to all of this. It's very hard when you're viewing things that seem to be lacking in integrity to process that. But if you know that's a buzzword for you, if you know that's a button for you, take it with a grain of salt, and that's where you have to come back to truth. You know what your truth is. You can recognize a lack of truth when you see it, but it doesn't have to affect you. You don't have to own it. Now, somebody just asked, what if that person is an atheist? Here's the cool thing about this work. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter at all. That's kind of like if somebody doesn't believe in psychology, it doesn't mean that psychology doesn't operate. And I have absolutely no problem with people being atheists. There's all kinds of reasons for people to be atheists. I think sometimes it's just semantics. My former husband was an atheist when we met. He got it and saw that there was something beyond physical life, and wanted to tell his father, who was on his deathbed. I'm like, don't tell him. He's going to think you're crazy. He's going to die. He'll figure it out when he gets there. And of course he did, because he talked to me once he got there. But I didn't feel the need to explain it. Who gave the gift? I believe that the gift is from Source. I call my source God, probably because of the way that I was raised. I was raised Methodist. But wherever perfection began, and if we're talking about that Big Bang, all right, whatever this was, that's where there is a state of perfection and a state of totality. And so we each are imbued with those gifts as we travel through this God school, this life ribbon, as we go. And we can't handle all of them all at one time, so we kind of say, okay, these are the gifts I get this time, this is what I'm going to accomplish, and this is how I'm going to accomplish it. It's actually pretty cool, if you think about it, that there is a system in place which explains all the differences. All right. I don't think I would ask somebody where they think they get their talent. If you're, now I understand the question a little bit better, Eve. If you want them to do a list and they don't believe in God, okay, now I understand the conflict there. Sorry, took me a minute. I think that to just say, the gifts I possess are. The gifts I possess are. Which is still better than saying, well, I'm this and I'm that. The gifts I possess are, so that you can kind of get them to the thinking of beingness versus the doingness. I would say that might be a word. Does that phrase make sense to you? Does that help the question? Because I know that a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of God. Some people are actually more agnostic than they are atheists. They'll say, I'm an atheist because I don't believe in God, but they believe there's something after physical death. So it may be, too, that they have another, that instead of being atheist, they may be more closely aligned with an agnostic viewpoint. If that's the case, that might be something to explore. Do you think when you're dead, you die, you're dust? Then you're an atheist. That this is all there is. And that phrase actually came from my former husband, who said that to me. That when you're dead, you die, you're dust. I'm like, uh-oh. I married an atheist, didn't know it. For those of you that know the story, it's because we got married 11 days after we met, and he spoke German, I spoke English, and we didn't speak the same language, so by the time we figured it out, we had already been married. Oops. He didn't know I talked to dead people. Oops. It's a true story. But when he got it, he really got it. And it came from his background, having 26 members of his family gassed in the gas chambers during the Holocaust. I can respect that. I can understand that, as his mother said, there is no God. If there is a God, where was he when your family was wiped out? A whole branch of the family was gassed. I get that. But I think that to be able to just say, I possess the qualities of, or I have the characteristics of, still seems better than, well, I'm this, I'm that. And it should lessen that sense of conceit or arrogance. It's a hot button of this energy. Creativity and communication. Talk to this person. Talk. This person's going to want to talk, probably more than you may want to talk about it, unless you've got this energy too, or you've got the cousin energy. Learning by doing. Let the person talk. Let them express their feels. This is a free spirit energy, is a feeling energy, is an emotional energy, and most of all, it's an expressive energy. Or if they are not communicators, if they're on this end of the spectrum instead of this end of the spectrum, this one being strong communicators, this one being needing to learn how to communicate, then encouraging them to talk. If they are uncomfortable talking, encourage them to write. Oftentimes people that have this energy carry writing gifts, writing talent, teaching as well, because it's all kind of connected. It's communicating information. It's the exchange of that information. So if they don't want to talk about it, even if they don't want to talk about it to you, then to encourage them to write a journal or to share anonymously. Sometimes there are groups online where people can express their opinions, but they're anonymous, and sometimes that can be helpful. But any way that they can use words to communicate what they're trying to say and to have an audience to hear it, even if it's an audience of one. Because people that have communication and creativity have a need to be heard as much as they do to express themselves. It's not just about the expression. If somebody does a wonderful painting and it's tremendous, it will have more value to that person, not because they created it, but because somebody else appreciated the beauty that they were able to create, because it's a gift that they're trying to give to make people feel better. So it's all about expression. Also, as I mentioned yesterday, a lot of times people that have this energy are very think outside the box people. And so if they have ideas of what to do, even if it's a young person, even if it's a child, don't automatically dismiss it just because it doesn't seem to come from somebody who has more education or who is older. Because a lot of really good ideas started from people that you never would have thought would have had as much background or education to be able to come up with something that's pretty terrific. Simple things. You probably know the story about Velcro. It was a mom who had a high school education, and her kids went out to play, and they came back in. They'd been out in the fields, and the burrs were sticking on their socks. And when she saw the interaction between the sticking of the burrs and the fabric, and she had little kids who were having problems tying their shoes, she thought, well, Velcro, as an example. Guarantee you this person had creativity and communication probably as her main lesson, because it's a real outside the box thinking. It's observational and it makes sense. So if you have somebody that has this energy, or you yourself have the energy, journal. If you can, if you don't have anybody to talk to, if you live by yourself, or if it's somebody that is in your life, they need to talk about it, listen to what they have to say. Sometimes you just need to bear witness to it, not disagree, not add to it, not even comment, just affirm. Just let that person know that they are being heard. That's really, really important. Let that person know they're being heard. Affirm what they're saying. If you disagree with what they're saying, I'm not saying don't have that discussion, but at the same time, remember, their way of coping with this is to get it out, to take what's all up here going round and round and put form to it so that they can make sense of it. Christiane, your son writes songs. Boy, if ever there were a time for creative people to be creating music and books and stories, this is the time. Heroes, profiling heroes. I think this is a wonderful, rich fodder from which creativity can grow. So definitely, I would say that would be something that I would encourage. Or if you have it yourself, to do yourself. Set time aside every day to just do something where you have that outlet of expression. Does that make sense to you? Anybody else have somebody in their life, or you yourselves have creativity and communication, and it's something that you feel the need to connect with people, even chatting and being able to do creative projects, to talk about what's going on, FaceTime, WhatsApp, any way that you can interact with people. That's going to be really, really important. Does that make sense to you? Anybody have any challenges, or is there something that you're not sure about connected to that? Okay, looks like several people are saying yes. If you have people that are lacking in communication, again, encourage them to write, because writing is private. And a lot of times people that are creative prefer not to share looking at somebody or one-on-one, but they do like to at least get it out. And that's where the writing would come in. Okay. If you have people that have challenges with communication, sometimes there are creative outlets. If they can't put words to it, perhaps there's something getting in the way of their being able to communicate with words. Then sometimes doing painting, coloring, those kinds of things, having a keyboard and just hitting the keys in an angry way, or hitting the keys in a nice way so it reflects what the emotion is. Remember, expression, outlet, whatever and how that can be. Yes, talking with your family members and chatting is really great. completion. You know that completion is always going to be kind of, as I said yesterday, one of the biggest buttons that's being pushed by the coronavirus, because we don't know the outcome. Yes, woodwork would definitely work. Anything where you have creative expression, Eve, would work. When you don't know the outcome, with completion overall, as we said yesterday, the lesson inherent in it is to be present and learning to be present and being focused on the now, not the then, and also to not build up any expectation. I'm not sure that I mentioned this yesterday, but there's a saying, expectation leads to disappointment. That's a common axiom of completion spiritually. If this is what you expect, and this is what happens, and this is what you expect, the difference between the two is where the disappointment is. If you want to get rid of the disappointment, you get rid of the expectation. You only have the what is, not the what if, not the woulda, coulda, shoulda. If ever there were an opportunity for people to learn this lesson and to get it taken care of, and remember, once you learn the lesson, it's yours. You don't have to go through circumstances that trigger you so much. This is it. This is the ultimate completion test as far as I'm concerned, universally. And because so many people have completion, it's one of the oldest energies you can have, it makes total sense that we would sing this worldwide. So focusing on what can you do today? What can you do today? You can only take in so much information. You can only accomplish so much in one day. You don't know where this is going. Well, tomorrow you'll know more, and that will move us down a little bit toward the end result. But at the end of the day, worrying about what's going to happen is not going to change what's going to happen, and it's going to change along the way. So why stand here today and make up a story in your head about what's going to happen tomorrow? The story is like, I could get this. Yes, you could. Or you couldn't. But you don't have it today. So let's focus on the fact that today you don't have it, at least as far as you know. Let's start from the premise of today I can make sure I wash my hands. I can make sure that I wear a mask if I go outside, and gloves. I can make sure that I reduce my risk factors as much as possible. That's what I can do today. And so for today, I'm going to feel in control. And then after today, I'll see what happens. All right. Tomorrow, it's a new day. Tomorrow, if I don't accomplish everything today, guess what? I got another shot at it tomorrow. So trying to steer away from the idea of it's going to take, we're going to be in lockdown another month. It's going to be the summer before it happens. You're not going to have a job to go back to. All of those thoughts may at some point be true, but here's the thing. They may not be true at all. So don't waste the energy today worrying about tomorrow. Now, someone just said they're having a problem hearing me, so I'm going to stop for 1 second and ask, is there anybody else that seems to be having some problems hearing me? Because I don't want to continue if you're hearing it. Hearing the voice is getting muddled. But can you still hear me? I'm just going to ask that. I'm just going to wait a minute because there is a little bit of a delay. All right. Hopefully that's resolved itself. If it's not getting muddled, can you say it? It was just a few seconds. Okay, good. We're back on. And thank you for letting me know that. That's probably being affected by the amount of oomph behind the stream. Remembering that because I'm in lockdown, just like you, I'm on a home environment. I don't have all the bells and whistles of what I have in my home studio. So thank you for your understanding and patience on that. So back to completion. Anything you can do, again, to focus on the now. And if it's a child, to preoccupy them in a way with activities today. All right. So that can be something that can be helpful, or to encourage children who are grown to, say, have a project and to be realistic about what they can accomplish today and not be worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. Fear, worry are negative energies that suck the life out of you. They don't help you anything. And an exercise that might be helpful, or something you can say that might make them think, would be this. Okay? We are almost to Easter right now, and I guess we're actually going to be talking on Easter too. And so take that person back and say, all right, think about where you were in your life a year ago, right around Easter time last year. Usually people can remember what was going on in their lives around significant dates like holidays. So this is a good one and a good time to do this, okay? So think about where you were a year ago and think about where you thought you were going to be now, a year from now, which would be now. If that makes sense, all right? Just like if we were today at Easter in 2020, we can project where we think we're going to be next year at this time. So I'm going to ask you to have them go and think back to where they were looking forward to today. And ask them, are you where you thought you were going to be? 99% of the time someone's going to say no. If they say yes, say the follow-up question, you're exactly where you thought you would be now from where you thought you'd be last year. Because there's so many unknowns in life, honestly. Things change a whole lot more quickly than you can even imagine. A new job opportunity, someone comes into your life, you move, you change jobs, and a lot of times none of these are foreseen. They come up as we go along life. So you can get them to say, honestly, no. Say, okay, back then you might even have been worried about where you were today, but here you are. Here you are. And it all worked out. And it's not where you thought it was going to be, so it might be different than you thought, but it's still good. So why in the world would you waste any time now worrying about things that A, you can't control, and B, that worrying isn't going to have an effect on it, and C, that turned out maybe even better than you thought anyway? Why not just focus on today? So I want to tell you a little bit, kind of a funny story connected to that. It has to do with Valerie Bertinelli. And I know we've gone a little bit long today, but that's because there's been a lot to talk about. You might remember Valerie Bertinelli. She was, been around for a long time, and several years ago she was on the cover of People magazine because she turned 50, and she'd lost all this weight because she put on some weight, and she was doing the rounds, and I think she was even a spokesperson for Jenny Craig or one of those. And so she was being interviewed on Entertainment Tonight or one of those shows, I don't remember which one it was, live. And there was a young girl interviewing her, and at the risk of stereotyping, she was what I would call kind of, and it was in LA, so kind of a 20-something gym bunny, all right? And I don't mean that unkindly, but she had the spandex outfit on and her blonde hair up in her ponytail, and was in a fitness studio, and here she's got the microphone, right? She's like, so Valerie, you must just love to diet and exercise. Now, there's a cardinal rule in law, as there is in live interviews. You never ask a question unless you know the answer, because you're live. Just like in the courtroom, you're on a witness stand. All right, so you always know the answer before you ask the question. You could see on Valerie's face this, and I'm going to try and imitate it to the best of my ability that I remember it. Okay, so something like this. Saw about 10 emotions go through it. It was like, oh crap, are you kidding me? You're so young. How am I going to answer this question? Because that was really stupid of you, and I want to be honest. Okay, I'm ready now. And it was just this, all at one, okay? And here was her answer. No, actually, I hate to exercise, and I love to eat. Well, you would have thought that this young girl had just learned that Santa actually didn't come down the chimney. She was crushed. You could see she was so enamored with Valerie Bertinelli. And Valerie took a big breath and said, look, let me explain it to you. I, like I say, love to eat. Exercise is a hard time. And the thought that I had to lose all this weight was very intimidating and overwhelming. So what I did was I got up in the morning and I said, this is what I'm going to try to do today. I'm going to try and eat better, drink more water, and exercise X amount. And I would do it. I had control over today. And at the end of the day, I would kind of review it and say, did I eat right? Yes. Did I exercise? Yes. Did I drink enough water? Yes. Yay! Today was a good day. Some days I was like, no, I ate some junk today. I went to Taco Bell. I was supposed to work out for an hour and I skipped it. And so some days it was like, yeah, today wasn't so good. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, if that was my decision and my review and it was honest, the good news is tomorrow I got another shot at it. It just meant I screwed up one day. It doesn't mean I'd screwed up my entire plan, my entire, what I was going to do. I literally just had to take it one day at a time. And of course, she starred in the TV show when she was a kid, One Day at a Time. I don't think she meant it, but it just flew out of her mouth. And when I saw that, I thought, if that isn't the perfect analogy for completion, all you really can do is take things one day at a time. The only way that you're able to interact in the world around you or make any difference or accomplish anything is today. And when it comes to the coronavirus, if you can refocus the attention to today and understand if you do the best you can, the todays will add up and tomorrow will take care of itself. Keep the person grounded in the now and the present. And if it's you, obviously, I would want you to do the same. Does that make sense? I'm going to wait and see if you guys write with that. Because, like I say, completion is the one that's really being kicked here. All these dire warnings and dire circumstances and millions and this and that and the statistics, and where people with money and finance are going to feel comfort in statistics, completion people are going to be totally overwhelmed by it. And it's going to be some proof that the sky really is falling, Chicken Little. And so you want to reduce that angst. So I'm going to give a second and see if somebody wants to comment on that. And hopefully you're still hearing me. I haven't seen anybody typing for a few minutes. All right. Lastly, Master Soul Energy. Master Soul Energy. If you are a Master Soul or you have it somewhere in your lesson plan, you are going to want to save the world. You can't. That's just the truth. You can't save it from coronavirus, and you can't save it when we don't have coronavirus, and you're going to feel that you're supposed to. That is the responsibility, the mantle of the Master Soul Energy. You feel like you personally are supposed to make a big, big difference. Well, if you think about water, and you think about the ripple effect in water, the spiritual, the energetic ripple effect also is at play here. So while you might not be able to save the world, you can affect positively your corner of it. And if you affect your corner of it, and then somebody else who has this energy affects their corner of it, etc., etc., it's a wellspring. So you have to be content with what you can do. And you have to be aware that it will never feel enough. It will never feel enough. And that sense of lacking, and I should be doing more, and I need to be doing more, that's going to motivate you to come up with new and creative ways to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem, and that will quell that sense of inadequacy in terms of obligation to the entire world that you will have. But you already live with this. So this is no different for the coronavirus. It's just a matter of what you can do. So organizing volunteers, food runs, taking care of your neighbors, checking in on people that don't have people to check in on them, making sure that if people are ill, that maybe you are a point person to help disseminate information to family members, because it can be exhausting when someone is ill to have to talk to a bunch of people all the time, although thank God we have things like group chat now that we can do, to be able to come up with ideas and get on the phone and say, hey, maybe we could put together some kind of a food bank specifically for people that have lost their jobs because of COVID-19. I've got a garden, I've got all this extra produce, so you've got a place where I could, a big parking lot in the back of your business, maybe we could have some kind of a safe place for people to come and get food that for free that can't afford to pay it. I don't know, those kinds of ideas. I think that to be able to, do that, I yes, I see Janice. I know you're a critical nurse and have been, and I'm sure your empathetic bells and whistles are going off big time. What can you do to help them? You can listen, you can support, you can reach out to them, you can pray for them energetically, doing visualizations where you surround them with healing. And by the way, healing energy is pale, pale blue. It's like baby blue. And if you can close your eyes and get in kind of a meditative state, and you can imagine blue light around individuals you know who are sick, health workers, the world encapsulated in this pale blue light. If everyone would do that, it certainly energetically is going to be bringing that healing energy in. Protection light is always white. It's always white. So to visualize any workers that you know, or just workers generically, because they're all heroes in my book, with white light certainly is something you can do. If you find that you know people in a particular area that are not receiving the help that they need, and we know that's going on in a lot of places, to be proactive with rallying people through petitions, through talking to the government, whether it's local government, state government, federal government, to make those voices known so that there can be a wellspring of voices, or add your voice to the ones that are already protesting the lack of care. We're starting to see the frontline workers contracting this because they're not having the equipment that they can use. What you have to be careful about, though, is not to feel guilty. Healing altar, perfect. But make sure you don't feel guilty about the fact that you are not on the front lines too, because you will feel that you're supposed to be. And the truth of the matter is that your time was your time, and the people that are there now, this is their time and their challenge. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person, that you are a retired medical person and you are not actively out of retirement. You've paid your dues, so to speak. You've had your time, and you can support them. You can empathize with them. You can surround them with love, light, protection, prayer, all of those things. And I have no doubt that you are, because you're one of the most giving people I've ever met. But your role has shifted now, and that's okay. And this is where that sense of no matter what I do, it's not enough comes from. And yet every drop in the ocean changes how much water is in the ocean. Even one drop of water added to the ocean changes the ocean. And so as we continue to put our drops into the water, we are going to change the dynamic of what that ocean looks like. And right now it feels like a tidal wave. It feels like we're being smashed by a tidal wave. It will pass. And depending on, I think that there are some people that will benefit from this for having done it. It will define for some people whether they choose to stay in this profession. My personal sense is you're going to see a lot of medical personnel leave because they're not going to want to be in this position again. Okay, who would blame them? But then that's going to open up opportunities for people that are looking for work, or people that would never have thought about doing that work. Or perhaps it will start a dialogue in how can we treat those people better, because look what they've gone through. And that's what I'm hoping. Same with teachers. I guarantee you that all of the parents that had the kids in the class that were the ones that were disruptive, that said, not my child, it must be the teacher, they're the ones that are going to understand homeschooling their kids, what the teachers go through every single day with their kid in their class, along with 29 others. This, to me, is one of the good things that's going to come, is this real day-to-day understanding in a very visceral way, and respect for what other people do and the appreciation of it. So I think that it's not wrong for anyone to make a decision that caring for themselves and their home and their family and their communities and their own families is enough. Because there comes a point in time where all you can do is all you can do as one person, but that master soul energy is going to kick your butt and say there's got to be something more. But remembering in a broader sense, when you have master soul energy, you're going to come at it intuitively, prayerfully, energetically. Do what you can within the reaches that you have. And just live with the fact that it's never going to feel enough any more than it does any other day. But at the end of the day, all you can do is all you can do. And while we have no limits spiritually, we do have limits physically. And that's just a reality, and we work within those boundaries instead of spending all of our time trying to go beyond those boundaries. I'll kind of wrap up the Master Soul Energy with this thought in that regard. Years and years ago, gosh, probably almost 40 years ago, because my oldest son Anthony will be 40 in November, and I hadn't had Philip yet, so I know it was at least 38 years ago. The show Phil Donahue was on. Many of you who are older, I remember that. The younger ones, maybe not so much. Just think male Oprah before Oprah. Okay, we'll say it that way. And at the time, there was this, I'm going to put it in quotes, new way of raising children, which was to give children more self-determination, to talk about their feelings at a young age instead of saying and telling them what to do, to engage them. And I think to some extent that still is part of the philosophy of raising children now, but it wasn't back then. Those of us who were raised in this, more the seen and not heard times. And there was a psychologist on it because it had kind of gone to an extreme and where it was total self-determination. And so Phil Donahue was asking the psychologist, is this healthy for children? And I've never forgotten his response. I thought it was really tremendous. He said, children, even if they, regardless of the self-expression, which you should encourage, certainly, but they still need limits. And Phil Donahue said, well, isn't that kind of contradictory? He said, no, let me explain it to you this way. And this is what I want you to hear, so really pay attention to this. Phil Donahue didn't say, the psychologist didn't say this, I'm saying this, because it stuck with me all these years. He said, if you set limits that are appropriate for the person's age or circumstance, basically it would be today, but the age, it's like taking children and putting them in a room that is brightly lit. They can see where their walls are, and yet they still have the freedom within those walls to make their own choices, to have that self-determination, but they know what the parameters are within which they can function. If you don't at least give them limits as far as what's acceptable, rules, structure, as long as they're reasonable, of course, then it's like putting a child in a dark room where there is no light and where they spend all of their time with their arms outstretched trying to find where the walls are because they don't know how far they can or cannot go. I thought that was brilliant, and I think it really, I wish I remember the guy's name, and I think it really also applies to the Master Soul Energy. We have limits, and it would be foolish not to acknowledge that the physical world, that they do exist. They can be really far away, these limits. We can have a lot of space, but we need to move and function within them, which means we can do what we can do, given what those limitations personally for each person, and they're different for each person, are. So I hope that makes sense. Jackie wanted me to, well, she didn't say to make everybody aware, but I am going to say, she wrote, today is a day of worldwide fasting and prayers for ending this pandemic. Thank you. So, we've gone through a myriad of topics today, a few more thrown in than what the description was. I trust that the universe gives me the words that you need to hear, and I hope that this has been helpful today. We will continue kind of related to this tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. So, thank you so much again. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, Good Friday, and we will talk tomorrow. And thank you for your patience. God bless you all. You are my heart, and I thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.